Welcome to the Athletic Performance Podcast, a conversation for all things performance related. I'm your host, Ryan Patrick, and today we're going to do a deep dive on everything speed, power, and strength. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to today's episode. I'm Coach Ryan Patrick, and I'm excited to bring you an incredible conversation with Rich Thaw, the owner of Empower Fitness and Sports Training in Montreal, Quebec. Rich has an impressive track record working with athletes at every level, from youth to professional, including the NHL's Montreal Canadiens. In this episode, Rich shares his pragmatic approach to developing speed, power, and strength in hockey athletes. We take a deep dive into the nuances of speed, exploring the differences in sprinting progression on ice versus ground. Rich breaks down the force and velocity characteristics that define elite speed and discusses the unique nature of the hockey stride. We also tackle the injury challenges specific to hockey, like groin pulls, and how Rich is proactively vaccinating his athletes against these common issues. Plus, we get into the unique conditioning demands of hockey and how Rich prepares his athletes to perform at their peak on the ice. This conversation was incredibly insightful, helping me appreciate both the similarities and differences in hockey athletes. If anything in this show resonates with you, please help us continue to produce this podcast and share the great information our guests provide. There are a few ways you can do this. First, please subscribe and review this podcast with 5 stars. It may not seem like much, but as a new podcast, this helps us grow our reach greatly. Secondly, please like and share this episode, either directly with someone who would benefit or on social media. To find out more about me or the guests on this show, please follow me on Instagram at Coach Ryan Patrick. I have a Rich Thaw on the show today, man. We go way back. We've been, communicating on Instagram forever. We obviously got to meet through the Unicorn Society when I was a member of that. And we kind of maintain this relationship, which is really cool, man, because I know you're doing great things. And I do miss having the opportunity to see you on a more regular basis. So at least you get to see your pretty face today here. But for those that don't know you, man, start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Name's Rich Thaw. Grew up in Montreal, Canada. Grew up playing hockey, and that's pretty much my path into the sports performance realm. Was looking for a leg up on the game. I had the skill set enough to be like good-ish, but not good enough to make the next level. So I fell upon sports performance. Fell into the likes of Exos and Verstegen and Boyle and MBSC, and then kind of dove deep into their work. Found out that I was just as passionate about the why behind sports performance and increasing insert valuable metric than I was the outcome. The outcome was awesome, but also the why behind it was like really drove me. So I just dove deeper. And as I moved up in the leagues, obviously my friends were better than me, went farther than me. So I ended up training them, applying those tactics and techniques, and seeing that it actually worked. So then just kind of furthered my drive and admittedly need to know more. It's not want, it's a need. And then internships at Boyles in the States, and then came back, started the athletic performance program here, ran an internship program for 10 years and a mentorship program. And then fast forward 4 more years, and then I opened up Empower.
How long's Empower been open now?
This is year 2. So like January 23 was day 1.
Oh man, I feel like it's been longer than that. You're killing it.
That's it.
A couple of years in, man.
Thanks, man. Thank you. It's definitely a lot of work.
Right. Owning a business is there's many not glamorous things on the side. It's be so nice to just come in, do some coaching, and then go home. But even writing programs can be a little exhaustive.
Yeah, what's that like?
Right. Okay, so let's talk about Empower, and let's talk about some of the athletes you work with. So I want to start really broad here, and we'll probably navigate some different tangents and stuff, which I think can be really exciting. But I know you as a guy who works with a lot of hockey players. What other athletes are represented? Because here in Canada, it's completely foreign, literally foreign to me in terms of what guys are doing up there. And more specifically, when these athletes are coming in, what does your assessment process look like for them?
So we don't only work with hockey players, although that is in the limelight because hockey is such a popular sport here. Also, I grew up on the ice. Like I've ice in my veins, like, so I know the sport very well. I also have a lot of contacts in the sport from growing up. Everybody who I played with either as influence or as coaching or went somewhere with hockey. So hockey is the main sport that we train here. However, we also train some pro level soccer teams, women mostly, and then also skiers and basketball. Sorry, but they're much less. They come second to hockey. Let me just say it that way.
Okay. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Tell me about your assessment process. When they come in, like, what are you guys going through? What does this look like?
It's pretty straightforward, to be honest. I mean, I have really gotten away from table tests, although I do see the value in them, only because it's almost as if, like, okay, you put them on a table and you move them one way, then you get them standing and the entire system changes in, just call it tone, or like the active muscleness, just to keep the simplicity high in this aspect here. So I just generally take them through a lift and I'll watch how they move. I'll watch how they sprint. I'll watch how they squat. I'll notice how, like, they have certain biases and patterns that just pop up because they are them and they've developed certain strategies to get to the level that they did. With some people watching them sprint or jump or throw a med ball, you can tell, like, are they just like a gorilla, so to speak, or are they like a kangaroo? Are they super springy, or they're like slow and strong as shit? Or do they just need all the things? We have some tools that we use, the plyomat, which can measure vertical jump and ground contact time. We use the laser sprinters also. The lasers, we have a Brower here, which I usually track the 10 yard dash. And I'm just looking at, like, I don't cue it other than, like, put your foot in the laser, you hear the beep, go. And I purposely don't cue it just to watch what their projection strategy is. And I'm kind of jumping the gun here, but hockey players are notoriously shitty sprinters. I don't really care. I just want to see, like, how do you have the requisite hip flexion? What happens to the femur and the foot when you're trying to go through that, like, stride cycle in the first couple of strides? And then with regards to, like, upper body stuff, I'm like, all right, let's do a chin up. Like, show me a med ball slam. Like, something where they don't really think about it, they just go. That'll tell me a lot about their upper body health. And then obviously when they're rolling, when they're lying on their back, I look at their ribs, and ask them about their neck and all that stuff. And that's pretty much it. Nothing super rigid, but definitely checkpoints along the way that I do make a point to look at during the session.
Yeah, that's something I've been finding more valuable, because I'll have some athletes come in and, we'll go through, let's just, a body weight series of exercises or a split squat. And they look, they show me a lot of compensatory strategies, right? Things that are just moving, maybe not in the ideal way. But with many of these athletes, we can make just some small modifications in training, and all of a sudden they look exceptional, right? So we change the constraints, or we change the way that we're loading to just impact how their self-organization is. And almost everything becomes an assessment, because it's like we can modify this on the fly. And more and more, I'm just wondering what the utility of some of these table tests are, what some of these kind of entry level tests are for high performers. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I don't think there's, I mean, like, there definitely is a carryover. If somebody has pain or some sort of negative consequence from training, then, I mean, absolutely. That's literally not in my realm. Like, I know enough about it to be dangerous, like the physical therapy side. But I wouldn't go ahead to be like, all right, cool, this table test says this, so we have to do these manual exercises. I think, like, us as the people on the performance floor, we got to be mindful of, okay, how can we use the tools that we have, legit, like lifting, to be able to get the outcomes that we seek, and then understanding that, like, with every outcome or, like, position change that we're able to make, there is positive consequences, but there's also negative consequences. Like, with one thing, you lose another. The way I was explaining to an athlete yesterday, I was like, look, I can get you to squat all the way down, but, like, do you need that? And I was like, if I give you that, you may also be less explosive. Like, you may not be as shifty on the ice. Like, we can go down that pathway. I don't want to, but if you want it, we can go. And don't blame me if we get that later on and you lose the shiftiness, Like, but I don't know unless we do it, but I don't want to touch it. He's like, fine, don't touch it. Okay, we're not touching it. We're going. Let's go,
Yeah,
So, yeah.
we're ultimately assessing the wrong thing. The goal is not to get, 3 on the FMS squat. It's to make you more explosive on the ice. So
Yeah,
are we chasing the right rabbit? And the other thing, and I don't know that a lot of coaches
I like that.
really want to hear this, but I feel like our job is pretty fucking easy. And
Yeah.
many times we go down these intellectual rabbit holes to stimulate our brain, to engage ourselves in what we're doing. And I think there's a ton of value in justifying our practice, understanding the nuances of anatomy and biomechanics and biochemistry for whatever your objectives are. But at the end of the day, if you're in the PRI realm, for example, and no shade to PRI because they have some excellent practitioners out there, but you'll get a coach who all of a sudden is wearing their quasi PT hat, doing the same 3 exercises, executed very shitty, just because we need to be intellectually stimulated. And many of my clients, they don't give a fuck how many split squats I've watched this week, but I just still need to coach them to do a split squat well, even though it's the same shit I've seen all week long. And
Yeah.
that's a hard pill for some people to swallow, to just do basic things at a really brilliant level and not conflate it with all of this tertiary context that's really taking away from what the objectives are.
Agreed. I think the brilliance kind of, this is kind of, I mean this with the utmost respect, like not blowing smoke up the butts of, with every person, they have a different strategy for split squat. So like one cue that you give to one athlete or one Gen Pop client or one athletic adult will be wildly different as a corrective cue than another. And the skill lies in to know what cue to give what person within like the first one. Like you give the cue, it doesn't work, you change up right away because you see it just didn't resonate, you know? I think that's where the mastery is understanding what cue resonates with the right type of person and identifying the type of people right away.
It's hard to develop those without actually practicing it, because I've
You need
given
to.
people cues that I'm like, hold up, just like forget what I said. Let's go back 10 seconds in time. Don't even do that. But when you give somebody cue, and I'm still guilty of this because I do like to talk a lot, and I'll explain things to athletes in a way that I think is intended to get them to buy in. But if you have to understand, a cue really is interference. We're interrupting, what their normal processing is, right? So I have this intention of what I want to see. So I've got a model of what this thing is supposed to look like in my head. I understand what their individual variance or strategy is and how it might deviate from that. And then I'm trying to change their motor output. So they have to process what I'm saying, change internally the way things are executed, and then get the outlook that I want to confirm this, right? So there's many steps to this that I think people can, especially inexperienced coaches, can miss. So you can learn the knowledge, you can learn the ins and the outs, and there's kids in their early 20s who haven't been coaching 5 years who know the language and speak very fluently, but they can't coach themselves out of a wet paper bag.
Good analogy. Yeah, I've seen that many times over. And it sucks that the remedy is so simple. It's like, hey, you gotta coach more, get more reps. Like it's nothing more complicated than that. Just like use it and be intelligent enough. Like, okay, cool, that doesn't work. Let's try something else.
Yeah, when we came up, or at least when I came up, because you've done these internships, you've been all over the place. I didn't have the luxury, or I chose not to do internships. So there are many things that I had to just get experience with and kind of learn on my own and glean what I could from the Mike Boyles, the Eric Cressys, the Mike Robertsons, Exos, when Mark Verstegen was in there, or whoever, Lee Taft. I did some stuff, where it just required me to get a lot of reps, to just get my hands dirty, put it in a little elbow grease, make some mistakes. And I feel like there are many people who try to shortcut this process. Like you can learn the education and the knowledge, but getting the experience to deliver the right thing at the right time, I think that's only afforded to the people who really put in the work.
Yeah, it's tough to swallow. But yes, you're very right. As soon as you come to realize that you just need more reps is the time when it'll start working and clicking. Just coach more. Hard stop.
It's not that complicated. I don't want to get too far off track here. You talked about hockey players sprinting. They're notoriously shitty sprinters. And
shitty sprinters, yeah.
shitty sprinters.
Yeah.
So I don't know a lot about this. So I'm a speed guy. I like to study speed. But what do you look for when it comes to hockey players? Because to me, we think about the context of what they're doing.
Hmm.
They've got a boot that limits their ankle mobility. Their interaction with the ground is a tiny blade on a surface that's completely foreign to me and the athletes that I work with. The angle of force application is the stride, which to me is more of like a medial lateral force, right? So pushing wide. And how does this so when it comes to developing on ice speed, how do you do this inside of the training room? Is it like typical sprinting? Is it just fast, or are there other things that we should be thinking about?
Okay, from the beginning. So a couple things to note about sprinting on it's called on ground versus on ice. So the
Hmm.
stride on ground, essentially long, powerful strides. So it's increased ground contact time to decrease ground contact time. So think of the acceleration where it's like
Hmm.
bang, 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 bang. They're freaking flying.
Hmm.
Whereas on the ice, you can't do that. It's the exact opposite. So it's quick steps at first, and then it's long, powerful strides as you go through. So as you accelerate, you almost see like crossover, pop, 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 3 or 4 steps, and then the stride really opens up. And then they're also gliding. So in terms of propulsion, we're using, when we train that here, I mean, here, like in the facility, I don't really care so much about their strategy, like their arm swing, although I would like some sort of like eye socket, hip pocket scenario. Same thing with like how they push off. I will purposely set them up instead of like straight on. I'll set them up at 45 degrees sometimes, or we'll do half kneeling, where the outside leg is up, so they have to push off of like the inside edge, off the medial aspect of their foot to propel them out that way. Heck, I'll even do it the other way, just to force them to cross over and get
Hmm.
used to accelerating out of like a weird angle, because it happens in a game. Like I'm not going to replicate everything, but I think it's important to expose them to scenarios like that. So going back to the ground contact time thing, I don't care so much about how the sprint pattern looks. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be good enough, because what we're training isn't the technique. We're training the qualities of sprint performance. So can you drive really freaking hard for 10, 15, 20 yards and accelerate quick? And then once you've reached quote unquote top speed, it's not really top speed. Once you've reached quote unquote top speed, can you maintain that cadence or that power output projecting you forwards? Because the two similarities of off ice and on ice is just like it's legit forward projection. And yes, they'll have skates, but more or less it's the same muscles that project you forward. So like a sprinter is like hamstrings and glutes and then quads to some degree. So it's like very sagittal plane-esque.
Hmm.
Whereas like skating is more of, I would legit say just transverse plane. Because one skate is gliding forward on like the flat edge, or if you think of a shoe, the flat part of your shoe. The other one is inside edge or like medial aspect or arch. And then your whole leg ERs, externally rotates, and you're driving out. So it's like glutes, lateral quad, crazy. And you see a lot of groin pulls because lateral quad and glutes are a shit ton stronger than the groins. Plus, being bent over in that like I don't know, forward position, which puts
Yeah.
that groins on stretch. So a stretch muscle is like a weak, or a muscle is put in like a disadvantaged position, a weak muscle, so to speak. So glutes versus stretched groin, like groin pull every day, like 9 times out of 10. So that's a big concern with the beginning of the off season, right through, or I call it like the postseason, right through to the preseason. So I call it postseason, off season, and preseason. Almost as like
Hmm.
help the guys and gals who come through here recognize the different phases of stuff we're doing. But essentially, we're looking at the types of sprints and the vulnerability to like groin pulling. It's not really pulling, but like the potential of groin pulls. So, like for example, a flying 10 or a flying 20, a lot of higher potential for like hamstring pulls than would be a 10-yard sprint from like a dead
Hmm.
stop. Like because it's really hard to pull something in 10 yards. It's like 5, 6 steps tops. Like if you're not doing. But yeah, so getting off my high horse here, my podium, the sprinting on the ground is very similar to sprinting on the ice, solely in the aspect of projection,
Hmm.
and we're talking about hip flexion, hip extension. And then everything else is pretty different, but it doesn't really matter because those qualities transfer.
Okay. So if I take two hockey players and one is a faster skater, does that mean he's going to typically be the faster person on ground in a regular shoe?
At what part of this is it, the acceleration at the top? Are we talking like coast to coast, like goal line to blue line? Are we talking like, it's like a puck
I guess that's
bobbled
fair.
up? Yeah.
Okay, let's talk a 10-yard sprint. If I have a guy who is a faster accelerator on the ice, is he also typically, is he the faster guy on ground in the
Probably, yeah.
acceleration? Okay, so the transfers
it's pretty close. Oh yeah, pretty much. Again, it's their strategy. So like on the ice, there's a bunch of, same with sprinting. There's a bunch of different strategies that people use to skate. But you'll notice if we take like the most popular hockey players, the McDavids and the Bedards, like there are similar stride patterns. And those players who've excelled or the top of the game, insert whatever kind of athlete you want to talk about, like they have similar strides. People are very shifty and it can accelerate quick. You can see they're low and they drive their leg all the way out and they can maintain that low position even when changing directions. So you'll see that very similar strategy on ice to how they sprint in the gym. Like they pretty much a one-to-one, and I won't even touch that. The only thing I care about is like, all right, dude, like all I care about is like when you're cycling through, forget the butt kicks. Can we go like knee punches up in front of you instead of like push harder backwards? Because like on the ice, it's like push harder backwards, right? So for sprinting, I'm like, I want that knee coming up because with that, like the reciprocal nature of sprinting or running or skating, like I want that knee to punch up. And if that knee punches up in front, it will punch back. So talking about like a hip health standpoint, I'm just looking like, can we get your hip flexors and groin, which so as with hip flexors, can we get those muscles strong enough to maintain the volume and stresses that we're going to see during the postseason, off-season, and preseason? And more importantly, can you maintain that during the year?
Interesting. I have one question. I wrote down, you talked about the, like, I'll just call it like spatio-temporal variables, right? So in a sprint, I think of there's, 4 big ones. You got like air time, ground contact time, stride length, frequency. In a sprint, like an on-ground sprint, the ground contact is longer early on and it gets shorter as you go. Was that clear in understanding that the ground contact time is initially a little bit shorter in a skate because they're trying to rapidly get turnover? And then as they gain speed, the ground contact is going to increase a little bit?
Yeah, it's the opposite.
Interesting.
So think about it, like you have to have some portion of glide on the ice. If you were to look at, I don't know if anybody's ever watched speed skating or like watched any version of hockey where people do stop hard. It's a quick crossover, pop, 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 and then it's like a longer, like more accentuated stride. But the first couple strides are really quick. Like you need to accelerate quick. That's pretty much it. And the science behind that is irrelevant there.
Sure. So when we're talking max speed, so now I'm speaking to a flying 10. What is without any coaching, what does that technique look like as they transition from the ice? Because in on-ground sprinting, you're going to have very short ground contact times at higher speed, which is the opposite of what you're communicating. Do you see some nuance to their strategy when they're trying to sprint, like at maximum velocity?
Oh my God, yeah, absolutely. But to the point I made before, like I don't much care about the strategy. I just want them to be able to project forward. I want that like some sort of like, I'm not coaching them to be amazing sprinters. I'm just coaching them to be as efficient as they can within the short window that they have. So like at the end of the day, I'm like, okay, how much do I really want to stop, walk them through analogies, video them, coach them on it? I'm like, no, let's move. Let's fucking move through space. Like build up to a top speed. So for example, we did some flying 10s today. We started with flying 5s. Sorry, a flying 10 with a 5-yard lead in. This phase was a flying 10 with a 10-yard lead in. And the next phase, we're going to probably do a 15-yard lead in with a flying 10. Just to be able to really touch on top speed stuff. I don't ever think they'll be able to really reach that unless they're going coast to coast on the ice. However, it's an important quality for them to maintain is like, this is what top speed feels like. This is what it feels like for a max effort over a quasi short distance amount of time. So all I'm going to coach is like, I would love to see that knee punch up on each leg. And I want to see you like almost like, we were doing the power skips, if anyone's familiar. So I was like, look, I would like you to be like a rock skipping on water, where you just whip it, and it's the first two skips. Like, I want to see every step being powerful, and I want to see you like covering a lot of ground with every step. That's all I care. Whatever kind of like foot contact thing is, like, I don't care. It fixes itself,
Yeah. So seems like exposure is the inoculation.
pretty much. Going back to coaching, like, just do more of the thing, and you get better at the thing. Like,
I do have one additional question. With
shoot.
them being stuck in a boot, what is
Mhm.
do you see, like, because a lot of sprinting is going to be this 4-foot contact, how much yield do they have through that ankle, or is their Achilles calf, soleus complex, is that pretty rigid? Are they able to hit the ground with a decent amount of stiffness, or do you find that's in deficit because they're constantly in a skate?
It's not as it definitely is in deficit related to some like a soccer player, for example. You can definitely see right away if we call like the rudimentary series from like Altis there, like
Mm-hmm.
the soccer players are much more stiff and springy, so to speak, than the hockey players. But then again, like the hockey players, they go back to a boot, so they don't really need to be able to like be super springy in nature. We do add a lot of that stuff early on in the postseason, and then keep up, or sorry, slowly ramp up the volume during the offseason, the preseason, but it's more of a let's keep their lower limbs healthy and reteach their body the ability to co-contract from the foot all the way up to the hip. Because we're going to be doing a lot of plyos, we're going to be doing a lot of like change of direction stuff and sprints, stuff that are like lower limb heavy, so to speak. So, but in a boot, the boots are engineered to have some sort of like forward lean. So the heel is higher than the toe, like more or less. The angle depends on the skate and also the player's preference, but there's also another strategy where players don't tie their skates all the way up to the top. Or they do, they just leave the top couple laces loose. So it allows more like ankle mobility and more forefoot touch. And then touching on the acceleration, there will be more on the front of the blades when they're like, it's almost, I mean, those who aren't really watching the video won't be able to see this, but almost like the toe like midfoot for the first couple steps, and then you go full blade to stride to get more of a. And there's, I mean, like going deeper down the rabbit hole, there's different cuts to the blade, which are meant more for like turning, and then meant more for like top end speed. And there's other one those are pretty much the two. There's like different versions diving deeper down those rabbit holes.
Now, this is fascinating to me because I know so little about this. Then, I mean, if I can put a neat bow on it, especially for the listeners, it sounds like, yeah, you have to give them a little bit of these things that they don't have so they can train the skill without getting injured. But beyond that, it's give them the exposure again to accomplish the task at hand.
Yeah. I mean, even at that, like I have a player this summer who came in who legit got labral surgery day one. Like he came in because he had labral surgery 2 weeks ago. I just got the green card. I got the card to go play, train. So I was like, okay, well, we can't sprint. Like he's like holding his arm up in like a quasi cast. I'm like, all right, we can't sprint, but like, what else can we do that can elicit the same performance qualities as a sprint that won't let him bounce around? All right, we're bike sprinting. Like, will he have the lower limb ground contact time? No. Will he have the stresses? Like, no. But at least his body will be able to train similar sensations as if he would be on the ice. Like, bike's very quad-y, if you want. And then hockey is a very quad-y sport. You want to just call it like what it is. So I'm like, okay, cool, that's as close as we can get without putting him in pain. We're doing that until he can do something else. Then we'll slow drip the other stuff into it. And right now, we're in a phase where he is sprinting again. He's feeling great again. He's moving the arm again. But we had to kind of bring him up with some extra homework to make sure his lower limbs are able to handle the insane jump in volume of like, let's call it plyos from 0 to 100 or whatever the number is.
to many.
Too many, exactly.
I actually thought you were talking about a hip labrum at first, which I know is a huge problem in hockey players. So I kind of want to.
Yeah.
I would like to go down that rabbit hole too,
Sure.
which I think would be really valuable. You talked about the skating pattern, this heavy external rotation with the glutes and everything that's going to ER that lower limb. and you talked about the forward lean and how much eccentric stress is on those adductors and groin. So, what are some of your strategies for managing this kind of stress so that so that your hockey players have healthy hips?
The PRI folk are gonna love this. Hamstrings and groins, bro. The left hamstring and the left ischiocondyle adductor. But very seriously, like using the hamstrings and the abs to help put that pelvis in like a more neutral position, or better, huge quotations there. But in a position where they can have more freedom of movement. Let's say it that way, because I don't really care about the neutrality of it. I care more about, like, can you get into the position? Is there pain? And also, can you get out of it? Can you function in both ranges and not have any negative consequence with it? Like in this, if we just leave them to their own, whatever it is there, then chances are they have some pinches in front, they have some whatever it is. Like there's a couple athletes here who notoriously have had some like hip pinching stuff, some FAI, femoral acetabular impingement. And it's pretty common, especially for goalies who are just always like static in that position, and even players. With a sport that's so ER biased, like the quads get hot and the glutes get hot and they get huge, they get hypertrophied, and then there's not much attention to groin work. So putting in a lot of isos at the beginning, just like, okay, cool. The goal of the isos for us is like, do you feel them working? Cool. Don't move. Let them shake. Let them hurt, because we need this foundation to be able to build up later on. And then we'll do some sort of like side plank iteration, and then we'll just advance the progressions on there where we get some reps. We got some ribs moving, some side bending, and then essentially just like holding positions that strengthen the groins and also put the pelvis. Essentially, we're finding positions that put the muscles in a less eccentrically oriented state. We're letting them work with discomfort, not pain. And then we're building up from there. We're eventually building up to reps of insert exercise. Like we're now at lateral lunges, alternating sides, which could be a really shitty strategy for somebody who has like FAI, like impingement in the front. But we've built up over time to a point where, like, cool, no one has any groin pain. No one has like, the front of my hip. Because we've noticed, like, hey, cool, hockey players don't have much IR because of the nature of their sport. They live in ER. So, like, to get more powerful and more range in ER, you got to take from somewhere, so they take from IR. So, like, is it really beneficial to give them insanely more internal rotation of the femur on the hip? Probably not, because they need that, like, stiffness to be able to power out of. But also, if they have pain, then we got to take some away. So, for two of the athletes, that's what we had to do, is like, hey, cool, you have pain. When we go deeper in a squat or deeper in insert position, when we sprint, like your groin gets hot and your hip gets hot. Okay, cool. Let's interject a bit. Let's add some more of the detail-oriented, nuanced work revolving around driving interrotation of the femur on the hip, more of like drawbacks, more of adduction, more of release of the like psoas and the diaphragm on that side to be able to like allow more hip flexion and therefore IR. And then we just go from there. If it works, if it's working, we dive deeper. If it's not working, then we change strategies. But everybody is like a unique snowflake. I mean, to say it nicely, that everyone has different strategies.
Okay. So in the early off season, you talked about doing the ISOs and some stuff like that. Is this where you want to start to get them some competency? I think that's a fair word, in like a more concentric or shorter position, because they've spent so much time in ER and elongating that muscle, probably coming off late season, tournament, congested play, lots of reps, just very intense part of the season. Is that going to be really where you start your focus?
Yeah, honestly, we start like sensation. Like, do you feel it working where it needs to work? Because I've tried in the past going straight to reps, like a higher rep range, enough to just like, okay, go feel it. Let's keep working through it. And at the end of the off season, I found people like stuff just started popping up. Every year when I did a post-mortem of like the notes at the end of every day, I usually take right at the end of every week. I'm like, hey, who mentioned what when? I was like, okay, there's been a lot of like hip or like groin stuff that's coming up, like more than I'd like, not a lot, but like 2 or 3 versus 0. I'm like, hey, cool. Like then I missed something at the beginning if it's popping up like 2 months later. So I only really, at the best case, I have 3 months with them, at the best case. And typically I have about like a month and a half, maybe 2 months. So I got to be really diligent with the stuff I do. And I got to take a lot of notes, but like with everything that's worthwhile, there's a delayed onset. Like what I'm seeing now in this phase is direct byproduct of the previous phase's work. So if I didn't set them up correctly, they're going to start falling apart this phase. So that's where the ISOs come into play as helpful. I'd be like, cool. At the very least, we're setting the foundation, and we can always build it. We can always make ISOs more intense by lengthening the lever, or simply holding a longer time, or just like turning it into reps, which is like, hey, you look good, let's do reps. You stay one more week on ISOs. Let's just like modify as we go.
Okay. So when you talk about ISOs, is this just Copenhagen planks, or what other kind of stuff do you like for that?
Yeah, I like long lever hamstring stuff. That's been in my game since David Gray came on my radar, admittedly. And Copenhagen, yes, absolutely. Also doing some sort of like lateral hold, almost like an ISO push on the wall. And just holding that like one leg, almost like hockey stride-esque position, and just getting ISOs both on with the emphasis on the hamstring, on the groin, also on like let's call it lower limb in its entirety, like floating heel type stuff, teaching the co-contractions of the lower body. And also I'm starting to play with some upper body co-contractions as well, people with wrist and elbow and shoulder shit, which happens all the time.
It is a collision sport.
Oh yeah.
This is fascinating, man. Like hockey definitely has so many nuances, yet the application of what you're doing is just brilliantly simple. You know, you're modeling some of the positions, the postures, the challenges that they're having, and setting them up for success. And I hear your lamentations about not having enough time to work with people, because if you've ever worked with upper level, if you're listening and you've ever worked with upper level athletes, the time that you have to actually influence them is so minuscule. You'll read Tudor Bamba, a periodization, and they write these quadrennial or annual plans, and they are just so incompatible with reality, because you have such a limited time with these athletes. They're in collision sports. They're performing at a high level. You really just need to prepare them to do what they're doing. Like the idea of performance enhancement is so minimal because you don't have enough time to drive adaptation. But I really love what you've communicated today about how you're approaching this.
Thanks, man. It means a lot. Coming from someone like you, definitely means a lot here.
No, man, I told you. I definitely have a lot of respect for you. One area I want to finish up with is to start to dive into some of the conditioning demands of hockey. I've seen people use what's called like a hockey shift in terms of an interval. Talk to me first about the physical demands of the game. Like, what are the work to rest intervals like with hockey? Because I don't fully understand that. And then what are some of the ways that you're actually incorporating this into their physical prep?
Okay, so the typical shift can be anywhere from like, let's call it the coach doesn't want to take you off, and you run like until you're supposed to come off, which should be about 45 seconds, maybe a minute and change if you're stuck out there. But it's like, it's go. And if you're an intelligent player, you go when you need to and just be in a good position. So you don't have to like buzz all over the ice. But typically just call it like roughly a minute, like 45 seconds on, probably 3 minutes off, 2 and change off, because there's 3 lines. So, and if whatever it is there. So it's a relative sprint sport. And during that time, you'll probably have a max effort sprint, let's say a 6-second or 7-second bout of max intensity for twice, 3 times if you're like fucked. Sorry, if you're like you got caught, you say gotta book it back. Like gotta back check real quick. So I will not touch that type of tempo work until like now in the off season. I'll only kind of touch on it now. But I'll do it a lot more in the preseason if they're going to camp, if they got to perform, if they have tryouts and whatnot. Otherwise, I'll just stick to the schedule. So if anybody's familiar with the kind of like the conditioning energy system development model, whereas like you need to build a strong base or foundation of aerobic capacity, and then you could build on that. And the way I kind of sell it or communicate it to everybody, both the athletic population, that we train here, the athletic adults and the athletes, is look, if the aerobic capacity or this bottom of this pyramid, that you're like cardio, I just call it, because that's understandable for them. I was like, your cardio has to be robust enough. Your gas tank has to be big enough that game to game, you couldn't recover. Or like week to week that you don't get run down and exhausted. So we have to take a long time. Unfortunately, it takes a long time to build up your aerobic base. So we're going to spend some time doing that. And then we're going to build up the quality of gas in your gas tank. Is your gas tank big? Now we're going to put the quality of gas in the gas tank. So we're going to work on the things like middle distance type sprints. So we're going to do like 1 or maybe a minute 30 type intervals where it hurts. And you're going to be on there for a long time, at least in their realm. But like, we got to work on that spectrum. And then lastly, we're going to do things like 20, 30, 40-second sprints. But so right now in the off-season where we're at is we're doing a 0.3 on the eco bike, which is for the girls, it's about 35 to 40 seconds. For the guys, it's about 28 to 31 seconds, which is like good work. Their legs are smoked, but the rest is 4-1. So like they have a good rest. And also it's preparing them rather like closer to the top of the pyramid or these max effort kind of energy system type activities.
That's wild. First of all, just going back to the beginning, I've heard the like 45-second hockey shift. I didn't realize they were going to be on a like 1-to-4 work to rest ratio in a game. To me, like especially with some of your best players, it seems like a long time to keep people out. So
it's even more, to be honest. Like so, like it may even be shorter. Like so for some of the pro players who play in the show and also in the AHL or like the league below, whatever the professional league is, where they're at, they'll be on the ice for anywhere between like 15 to 45 seconds, and they may rest like for like 10 minutes. I think it seems ready to go. Yeah, like depending on what line you're on. It seems like it'd
be really hard to just develop a rhythm as an athlete to get in your flow because there's not another sport like that I can think of.
No, I mean not like saying not that I really can know of, but you got to be able to like go and then just like be ready, stay ready.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
You talk about conditioning. I think we have a lot of similarities here. So I always think of these two lines like starting wide and then kind of converging, right? So you've got this aerobic side, you've got this alactic side, and then they kind of converge into what you're talking about as these hellish middle zones, the glycolytic. So I'm very much aligned with that. And the work, the rest demands of what that sport is are wild, because it seems to me that it's very glycolytic in nature, yet it's almost, you need a huge aerobic system because you do have these massive recovery periods. So you have to be able to replenish ATP, which, so I guess it is the optimization process, just getting more work within that glycolytic zone, gearing them towards, how much output can you get during these tiny work periods?
Yeah. So so I didn't really finish my analogy of like the aerobic, then the alactic and the glycolytic type zones, but essentially the premise is straightforward in that you have to be able to build this really robust foundation so you're able to last and recover between shifts, between games, and between weeks and months of training. And then these like super high intensity sprints, these glycolytic sprints where they just hurt the entire time, that's recovering shift to shift. That's super valuable, but like if you have 3 games back-to-back days, you're done. You're so smoked, you can't recover from that. That's why you need these like these, I guess you can say like these aerobic type intervals, whatever kind of range at the top, upper end or lower end of that, to be able to recover between those things. That's why they're so important. We spend so much time on them, We spend like 3 weeks, so much time developing these things, but we don't have much time. So I kind of adopted an undulating type model where we work on different qualities, but space them out different across the 4 days versus across like different phases. And then I'll add in some sort of testing too.
Yeah, I believe it's Latin. Can't think of his last name. I got the book right here. He did the high intensity interval training manual. Latin. I'm probably butchering that.
Got it.
Stupid American. But he talks in this manual about this kind of undulating model, and especially when you're on shorter time periods, or you're a sport coach who has practice in other skills and drills and strategies that you're working on, you have to come up with a model that is as robust as possible. And the best way to do that is to have exposures to these different intensities and zones that your athletes are going to be exposed to, but you may not have the time to progress them in a phasic manner like you're talking. So it's really interesting to me that just through working with them, like your intuition kind of led you to the same place that he communicates is like probably one of the most robust strategies available to us.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really think about it that way. That's pretty cool. I just simply was like, hey, what does it feel like? And then what's the season like? And then I read some research. I believe I first found it through this guy Anthony Donskov, really smart hockey guy. He was talking about the amount of total meters that they skate in a game on average in the NHL, and then working backwards from that as a base for conditioning. So, like, for example, on the tempo days, on their get the heart rate up and keep it up type of thing. Just like not suffer, but like get their heart rate around 160, 170, whatever it is, and just kind of coast there. So he's like, the amount of distance they have to cover is this. You can't just jump into that. It's a terrible idea. It's a lot of volume. So how do we hack it down and make it into more manageable bites? So that's what their conditioning is, hard stop. And the modality, like whatever you use for conditioning, was a bike or a rower or a runner or like a Versa climber or Jacob's ladder, whatever it is, like use that, but just be consistent with the progressions, because this is the total number they need to be at to be ready for that kind of volume come in season.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think for a lot of people, especially team sport coaches, they want to jump to that volume because tryout week is usually hell week for them.
Yeah.
Which is...
Yeah, you can't, man. Like it's like talking to a dead horse, you know. It's like beating a dead horse. Sorry, like you can't. Yeah. Like, I did it this way, therefore everyone needs to do it this way. You know?
We want to see who worked hard this off season. Yeah, so let's have a huge volume spike and just be an orthopedic nightmare for these athletes because their tissues are not ready for this kind of magnitude of loading.
You get injured, you're soft. Like, no, you just run them too hard, idiot.
Just have a little turtle and move on.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, this conversation was awesome, man. I learned a ton about hockey and just your training thoughts in general, and I appreciate you coming on here and just riffing on this because we went way off track from the questions that I had, but I found it to be just a really interesting conversation, man. So, just to keep it simple, like, what's next for you?
Jeez. First of all, thank you, man. This is really cool. I didn't even think of like the set list that we had here. It was just fun talking about it. Next for me, I mean, keep growing, keep doing. The plan is to be able to work with more sport organizations in the area. Like you mentioned at the beginning, I'm a year, 1.5. So I definitely, when you think hockey performance training in Montreal, I want you to think in power fitness sports training. And being able to send a message to these young athletes and also the athletic populations within the area, be like, hey, look, like you don't got to be this pro athlete to be treated and trained like one. There's definitely adaptations and things we could do around that can get you to where you need to be. That don't have to be super complex or just like boring basic shit. Mm-hmm. So that's the path that we're on right now. And we're going to keep on the path until it stops working.
Awesome, man. So where can my listeners find out more about you?
I'd say Instagram is probably the most popular place. It seems like I'm a one-trick pony there. TikTok I can't handle. Facebook is Facebook. So Instagram, coach _ Rich Thaw, or Empower, I believe, 2 underscores. But you'll figure it
out. I'll tag both, man.
Yeah,
Rich, it's been an honor, man. Thank you again for carving time, and look forward to getting this out and sharing it with people. Take care, brother.
Same. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to rate and review us with 5 stars only. Then subscribe so you can get all the latest updates.